We really need to use the coming months in order to get to the end game, and that end game should be the first part of 2011. Thank you. Our final panelist is Dr. Craig Emerson, who was just recently named as the new Minister of Trade in Australia by the new government there. His career in government, however, goes way back to his days as advisor to Bob Hawke when he was Prime Minister. And meanwhile, he's written 20 books or so, including on Australia's role in the world, so he brings a very deep perspective. It's great to see you, Mr. Minister, and we look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you, Fred. And if Minister Sharma is the veteran of this group, then I'm certainly the new kid on the block. And it's great to be here to be a participant in what I consider, and Australia considers to be a very, very important gathering on the service economy and the role of services in the Doha Round. When I was in my previous incarnation as a minister in the Labor government, that is up until 8 days ago when I was sworn in as the Trade Minister, I was, amongst other things, the Minister for the Service Economy, which is quite an innovation in Australian history. I think I was the first ever Minister for the Service Economy, but it was a testament to the priority that the government attaches to the service economy as a component of our overall economic activity and prosperity. In fact, when I was doing economics many, many years ago at university, I think Ron Kirk referred to invisibles, that the service industries were regarded as invisible. I don't think that really does credit to the service industries around the world, as if they're sort of behind the scenes, and they're far more important than that. And associated with that notion of the service industries being invisible was this suggestion that really the service industries are what's left over, a residual, after you take into account manufacturing and primary industries. Well, I say some residual. In Australia, the service economy contributes 85% of our employment, 75% of our GDP, but I think, as Bruno was saying, a much lower proportion of our exports, 22% in our case. Now, there's no magic number for the service industries in terms of overall exports, but you can see that there's a very large gap between its contribution to the domestic economy and its contribution to Australia's overseas trade. And I think it exposes as a myth the idea that the Australian economy is a mining economy, because the service economy all along has been such a dominant component of our overall economic activity. But I'll add this, that perhaps when I was doing economics again, and it seems like a long time ago, Fred, we thought of services as very discrete. That there was manufacturing, there were primary industries, mining and agriculture, fisheries and forestry, and then there were these separate activities called services. I think in the 21st century it's evident that services are embodied in everything, that is, in manufacturing activity, in mining activity. Again, I speak from Australia's perspective. One of our growing exports is engineering, associated with the expertise that we've learned in developing mines. Now, this is just one example. Manufacturing these days is only really viable if it contains bundles of services, obviously after-sales services, but also the logistics that go with manufacturing. You referred to just-in-time inventory management, for example. A manufacturing activity can't be viable in tough global markets without these bundles of services that boost their competitiveness by lowering their costs. And I think this is the new world in which we should be considering the service economy, not as some sort of residual, as it may have been considered 25 years ago, but important in its own right, dominant in so many economies in its own right, and an integral part of the competitiveness of primary industries and manufacturing industries. There's a huge opportunity, and perhaps it's true that I'm just an irrepressible optimist, but there's a huge opportunity on the part of the service industries to do the world a great service, and that is to be the basis for kick-starting the stalled Doha Round. There's now some work that you've done, Fred, that suggests that the overall global benefit from the deal that was on the table in 2008, while worth having, are not as big as we could reasonably expect. And here we have an opportunity to use the service industries, trade in services, the liberalisation of trade in services, to kickstart that stalled round, which would do everyone around the world a favour. And that's where I've been heartened by the discussions last night, and also with Ambassador Ron Kirk. He seems to be very committed to using this new opportunity of bringing in services as an integral part of the negotiations, rather than the bit that's still to be done that's left over, because it makes it a better deal for everyone. It makes it a better deal domestically here in the United States, and it brings services out of the shade and into the light, into the sunlight. And I think that that is an enormous opportunity for everyone here, for everyone. There is a complexity, of course, and that is when we're discussing the liberalisation of trade and manufacturing, we're talking essentially about tariff barriers, and before those, quantitative restrictions, border restrictions. But in services, it's the behind the border restrictions that do all of the protective work. And there was also a suggestion during my short time here in Washington that we really need to engage not just the trade ministers and the trade negotiators, but the regulators who are responsible for the development and administration of these restrictions on trade in services behind the borders. Because we could have every trade minister coming to the table with all the goodwill in the world, but going home to find that they can't do much because the regulators, those ministers and those authorities who are associated with the restrictive regulation have not been fully engaged, and think, well, that's a very elegant decision that you've come up with, but we're not going to implement it. And I think that's fundamentally important in the way that we approach this new opportunity in relation to the elevation of services in the Doha Round resolution. And to that point, there have been some suggestions to manage this, because you can imagine in such a dominant sector of the economy how complex it would be to start or to continue negotiations around every conceivable service. It's almost infinite. And so I think the concept of clustering that the United States, Australia and others have suggested may be a way of organising thought and organising the request and offer negotiations and organising a good outcome on services. The clusters that I'm aware of are logistics. We've already referred to those. America's put up information and communications technology, and I noticed that there are such companies represented here today. Obviously professional services, and Minister Singh was talking about, Sharma was talking about some of those, and environmental services, but they're just a few of the clusters that we could be working through in order to achieve a reasonable outcome here. Now, Fred, you've released a study. I'll see your study and raise your study because the Australian government has also commissioned one, and I have a copy here of the summary report, and I will take you only through the very bare bones of that summary. The report was prepared by the Centre for International Economics, and it's an independent assessment